Before we get into the stories, I'm excited to announce I have a new channel called Monster Trail Cams. Here's a quick trailer for my new channel. The link is below. Monster Trail Cams is your ticket to the unseen and supernatural. Sourced from a vast network of mystery hunters worldwide, our channel reveals a collection of strange creatures and supernatural events that will leave you on the edge of your seat. From shadowy figures lurking in dense forests to inexplicable entities prowling under the cloak of night, each chilling clip peels back another layer of the world's untold mysteries. We release new episodes several times a week. Okay, now let's get to the stories. I'm a ranger in a national park, but I don't feel comfortable telling you where. I still work here and can get in a bunch of trouble. I have been here for 5 years and have never had an incident like this until now. A woman has gone missing, just completely disappeared, and we believe she was taken by a creature that we cannot identify. We literally don't know what it is, but we are quite sure that she was taken by something that seems to know its way around. We are guessing it knows the most remote areas of the park because both she and it are nowhere to be found. It's been 5 days now, and not a single shred of evidence has been found of her, other than her tent and a few belongings at her campsite. Strangely, there was no evidence of a struggle. She was just gone. Even her cook pan was on the fire, looking like she had been cooking when she disappeared. Also, some of her important belongings were still at her campsite, so we are convinced she didn't just leave on her own, at least not without meaning to return. We're not telling visitors what happened yet. We've been instructed to just say that we don't have any concrete details yet, and to ask for their help if they see anything. But I have this urge to go out there and tell people what we think is really going on. This is so scary. I hope she is okay. I normally wouldn't share the truth with the public like this, basically because we've been told not to and I could lose my job, but I feel like people should know what really happens here. It was actually her family that first notified us when they didn't hear from her for a few days. They said she normally would at least send a text once a day. We looked and found her name in our logs and headed out to where she was camping. And that's when we found the footprints, and no sign of her, and we instantly knew that something was wrong. I'll share with you now why we're instantly on alert. 3 years ago, almost these exact same set of circumstances happened, but we did find the remains of that camper. There were signs of a creature attacking and consuming him, including fur and certain marks on his body. I won't get into the gory part, but the creature left quite a bit of evidence behind that helped us know it wasn't human, including the exact same set of footprints found at this girl's site. We have never been able to find out what the creature exactly looks like, and we're hesitant to call in forensics experts as we don't really want this getting out there, but we're all really petrified knowing it is still out there. And now this woman has gone missing in the same way, and we have no idea where she is. The unknown is really what is hardest for me. I wish the higher-ups would just allow experts to come in and help us. I mean, who knows what this creature might do next? I'm scared it could come after one of us. Target and follow us while we're out searching for clues. We've been scouring the area for any sign of her, but we just can't find her. The only thing we have to go on is this creature's prints, which are huge. Some say that she wandered off and got lost, but I just don't believe that. She was a very experienced hiker and knew these woods like the back of her hand. And plus, if she had just wandered off, why was her gear left behind? Her family says there's no way she would have left without it. Being in the outdoors was her refuge, and her gear meant everything to her. So, what does this creature look like? We really don't know. But it's big and has a very strange footprint like I mentioned. I guess I'm fixated on the footprints, but it's true. I can't get them out of my mind. Some say it's a Sasquatch, but I highly doubt that. This creature is something else, something new that hasn't been identified yet. I think we've never seen anything like it before. Whatever it is, we need to find this creature and get it out of the area. It's not safe for anyone, especially not for the visitors who come here thinking they're in one of the safest places on Earth. I had a strange occurrence at my job. It seems like a lot of people wait a while before talking about this stuff, but I just need to get it off my chest. I've been having a hard time sleeping lately and can't decide what I should do, or if I should even do anything at all. About a few months ago, I started working at a dermatopathology lab as one of the lab techs. It's a pretty easy job. For anyone not familiar with this sector, basically, we analyze skin for diseases, fungi, cancers, etc. I was hired when a previous lab tech went on maternity leave, so my contract with the lab is for 6 months. This is a small, privately owned lab on the East Coast. Pretty rare since Quest is huge now and gets most of the work, but some doctors still pay for specialized services or an actual human eye on specimens. My job consists of intake and the initial sectioning of the specimens before they're put onto slides for the specialists to look at. Prior to this, I'd hopped around a few small labs throughout the state, but this lab isn't like any other. I don't mean that in a good way. It's pretty run down. From what I've been told, the owner and head specialist has owned the building since the early 90s. He's in his 60s now, but has no plans to retire, which he says constantly. There's supposedly a maintenance company that keeps up the place, but I haven't seen them once. The parking lot is pitted with potholes, panels in the ceiling are missing, 2 of the 4 toilets don't work, and the furnace wouldn't turn on this week when they tested it. Like I said, the lab is small, so there are only 8 other lab techs. I pried a little bit to see if anyone thinks this is an odd situation, but the only answer I get is that it pays well, and I should keep my head down. I've been working Monday through Friday every week, but I got called in this past Saturday due to a tech being unexpectedly out. They needed someone to process the specimens that had arrived Friday morning, and I live the closest, so I headed in. After punching in my alarm code and locking the door behind me, I headed down to the lower floor of the building. There's only one room on this floor that is actually used for lab work. The rest is very maze-like, with rooms opening to other rooms, no real hallways, and stacks upon stacks of old medical records. I'm pretty sure there are a lot of violations going on, but I'm not a whistleblower, and I only have 4 months left on the contract. So, on this particular Saturday, I hunkered down in the lab room and got to work. I'd made it about 2 hours in when I heard a thudding sound. There are so many machines around that I assumed it was just that, but I realized it wasn't rhythmic. It sounded human-made, and I tensed up thinking someone had gotten into the building or was trying to... I pulled out my cell phone and got the emergency number ready, but decided to at least check out my section of the downstairs. There's an exit door a few feet behind the room I work in, so I could easily escape if something weird was up. And the sound was definitely coming from down there. I would have heard anyone coming down the stairs, and I hadn't, so whatever was making the noise was already in the building. Stepping out into the single hallway, I looked up and down before deciding my best bet was to stop outside each door and listen. The first 2 doors didn't sound like the thudding was coming from in there. When I reached the 3rd door, the sound stopped for a moment before continuing. I passed the tiny kitchen and break room and reached a door that I remembered was the owner's library. The thudding was coming from inside, and now I could hear scratching too. I hesitated for a second before pushing the door open and flipping the light on quickly. Inside the room was empty, except for stacks and stacks of journals and books. But across the room on the other wall was another door. I stepped through the piles of journals, the hair on the back of my neck standing up, and listened at the door. The thudding and scratching was coming from inside. Double-checking that I had the emergency number up, I quietly pushed the door open. It looked like a normal door, but I was surprised by how insanely heavy it was. The room inside was shadowed with narrow windows up near the ceiling, but it was enough light that I could see a cage on a table in the room. The cage was about 4 feet by 4 feet, and inside was something that I can only describe as a huge anteater digging at a corner of the cage with its curved, scaly back turned toward me. My first thought was that for some reason someone had left this thing here by mistake. But what on earth was it? And who would do that? I got closer to it, and when it turned around, I saw that it had a face similar to a monkey. I stumbled back, and the creature turned quickly towards me, baring its teeth at me. None of this made sense to me at all. Like, what was this thing, and why was it here at all? Let alone in a cage in the lab over the weekend. I stepped out and shut the door quickly, trying to process what I'd just seen. Were they running experiments on this creature? It was definitely a crossbreed of some kind, not natural in any way. I quickly went back to the lab room and packed it in. I just left without doing any more work. The lab supervisor gave me a hard time about not finishing, but I said there'd been a family emergency. It's now been a while, and I'm still thinking about that creature downstairs. Do I say something to someone? Do I ask about it? Or is it a secret? No one else has mentioned the caged creature in that room, and I'm scared that I stumbled on something I shouldn't have. At this point, I don't know what to do, or if I should check if it's still down there. Someone must be feeding it and taking care of it, but I don't have a good feeling about what they're doing to it. I know this is going to sound unbelievable and ridiculous, but I swear every word of it is true. I was 15 years old when my parents sent me to the foothills of West Virginia to stay with my grandma for a while. I'd been getting into a lot of trouble back home in Massachusetts, and they thought some quiet time in the country with grandma would do me some good. However, being there wasn't doing me any good. I was bored to tears and was already planning what I was going to do the minute I got back home to my friends. I guess Grandma could tell that I had a little spark of something mischievous in me because she woke me up early one morning to tell me that I needed to get up and get ready because we were off to an all-day church function. I was miserable all day. It was hot out and I was surrounded by a bunch of people I didn't know. My grandma kept pushing me to talk to one girl in particular, telling me we'd be good friends. I don't know what made her think that, aside from the fact that we were relatively close in age. I could see that the girl and I had very little in common aside from our age, and I could also tell she was as unimpressed with me as I was with her. Grandma volunteered to stay late and help clean up, and of course I had to stay too. The only saving grace was that the girl she sent me to talk to had actually been interesting. Once we got relaxed with each other, she got to talking, telling me a couple of crazy stories about a local monster called a Mothman. The girl's name was Gwen, and she hadn't ever seen the Mothman herself, but she had heard a few long-winded tales from her uncles about times they spotted the thing down in the hollers, as she called them, and riverbeds surrounding town. According to her uncles, and told to me by way of her, the thing was anywhere between 6 and 10 feet tall, had glowing red eyes, and a wingspan at least as wide as its height. She said most commonly people would catch it out flying at night, swooping down at cars on the back gravel roads. I didn't believe her, of course. To me it was just a little bit of folklore, but it didn't get lost on me that Grandma's house was on a back gravel road. So I'd be lying if I said she didn't succeed in spooking me, at least a little bit. As it started to get darker out that night, I found myself more nervous about the drive home and started urging Grandma to hurry things along. By this time, we'd been at the church for well over 8 hours, and she had finished the cleaning and was sitting and was now having coffee, chatting with the pastor's wife, and catching up on local happenings as if there wasn't another care in the world. Finally, she picked up on my urgency to leave, and we made our way out to the car. I could tell she was a little annoyed with my impatience as she snarked back at me. "What has gotten into you?" I didn't want to tell her, of course, that the Mothman stories were getting to me. As we started home, though, she brought the creature up herself. "You know," she said, "it's best we took off anyway. We should have left earlier, probably. The Mothman is usually out on clear nights like this." I faked my best scoff and pretended not to know what she was talking about. She then told me that she had overheard Gwen telling me about him, and then proceeded to tell me that she had seen him herself at least 3 times. My grandma was a God-fearing, traditional, straight-laced old lady. There's no way in the world she would tell a lie, so at this point I started to get extra worried. And I know you won't believe this part of my story, but it's almost as if the thing knew we were talking about it, because right when Grandma stopped telling me about her 3rd sighting, she slammed on her brakes and screamed. This, of course, is where my heart started beating out of my chest. A screaming grandma caught my attention, and I looked ahead at the road to see what caused it. There it stood. It looked dark gray under the light of the headlights, and it was standing motionless in the road, staring at us. I didn't even have to utter the words and ask if it was what I thought it was. I just looked over at her, and she nodded and put out her arm, silently telling me to sit back and stay quiet. I wasn't about to argue with her, so I did exactly what she said. And that's when this hulking creature leaned forward, as if he was peering in through the windshield at us, and then opened its mouth to let out an ear-piercing screech. As it screeched, I watched as its wings spread out, followed by it, taking a giant leap, then flying over us and straight up over the trees that lined the road. With the road now clear ahead of us, Grandma jammed her foot on the gas, and we got home quicker than I ever thought she could drive, and we ran as fast as we could into the house, slamming the door shut behind us. The next week, my parents came and got me. It was time for the visit to come to a close anyway. And when I got back to Massachusetts, I was a completely different kid. I stayed out of trouble. I listened to my parents. I did everything I was told. And let me tell you that I now have a new fascination with my grandma and what she might really be capable of doing. Don't get me wrong. I love my grandma. It's just that before this, I only thought of her as older and slower. Either way, I don't ever want to be sent back to West Virginia to face that thing again. Grandma will just have to come to our house. And so I've got a story from about 6 or 7 years ago when I spent a weekend at Olympic National Park in Washington State. What we like about Olympic Park is that it's quieter than a lot of other parks. It's a great place for when you don't want to see many people. And we spent a lot of that weekend hiking and were able to have the place pretty much to ourselves. We also like that the hiking trails around there cut through these really old forests, right? We just essentially go and get lost in the trees. We only had 3 days there, though. Just a long weekend, so each day we'd leave early in the morning and not come back to our hotel until sunset. So it was the second day when this happened. Mike and I were a couple miles in and we hadn't seen another hiker for hours. Also, this was the farthest we'd gone on the trail so far, which is important because we had never been in this area before. We get to this spot where the trees are wide open. What I mean is that it's like it's just all these bushes and undergrowth on either side of the trail, not full-grown trees. And it's like this for at least 100 feet. And all of a sudden there's this stink. It's something sour, maybe, is the best way that I can describe it. My husband's ahead of me and he stops us. Mike thinks a skunk's been through there. But I don't, because we've dealt with skunks before and they don't smell like that. This was different. And he's asking me, well, if it's not that, then what is it? And I don't know what to say. And the thing is, we both wanted to turn back now because the smell was making us sick. But we also wanted to see what it was coming from. In the end, we decide to push a little further, and the ground then starts to get muddy. And in the mud, we can see that it looks like something heavy was dragged down the trail. And also, the bushes are messed up on either side. As we continue, the smell is now so bad that I cover my mouth to try and keep myself from puking. Then we get to this turning point in the trail and there's all this trash stuck in the bushes. Chip bags, burger wraps, that sort of thing. It's everywhere. And now the ground feels really sticky. We now figure that the smell is coming from this trash, but my brain also knows that it's not all adding up. I know what a full trash can smells like, but this is worse, and I'm trying to figure out why. Then we see that a trash can has been shoved deep in the bushes. It's laying on its side with flies buzzing all around it, and the stink is the strongest at this point. So, Mike holds his one arm over his mouth and walks over to it and rolls it a bit. We both start gasping and gagging at the same time. There's a whole deer stuffed inside, and it's got these huge chunks missing from its legs. It's all covered in dark, dried blood and is really slimy, like it's been there a while. So now we're at our limit and we turn around and start running to get away from both what we saw and also the stench. We're also pretty creeped out that someone killed this deer and shoved it in a trash can. Like, who does that kind of thing? So we quickly make our way back down the trail. I'm thinking and sort of hoping that there's got to be some more hikers back in these parts, but we're still alone. Now we're walking downhill and we can see the campground below. It's also basically a resting spot, too, for hikers coming down from above. So it's got benches and trash cans for hikers. We're maybe 50 feet up from it and looking down when I first see this big dark shape coming out of the forest off to the right of the campground and walking in our direction. At first I'm thinking it's a bear, because it's got all this dark fur and it's just huge. But then it stands up on its back legs only and we can see its face. This thing's at least 10 feet tall, even though it is slumped over and looks like a gorilla. It's got no neck and has a flat forehead, that sort of human shape to his face. And then it starts looking around like it's looking for something, so Mike and I duck behind a tree but sort of have our heads sticking out a butt so that we can see and figure this thing out. And I'm trying not to breathe too loud, right? Because it's an absolute beast. And now I'm thinking that this is 100% what took down that deer. I swear we watched it for forever as it wandered back and forth like it was looking around. It would even disappear for a bit, but then show back up again. And by then the sun was starting to set and I was worried we'd be stuck out there in the dark with that thing that I knew could navigate the night much better than us. But eventually it disappears again, but this time it doesn't reappear, and we start to feel a bit safer. Mike waited a long time before looking back down there. And still the beast was gone. We walked as fast as we could, hoping and praying the entire time to make it safely back to the front of the park. We were trying to decide if we should tell the park rangers at all, because we were worried it wasn't safe with that thing on the loose, but then again, it's the right thing to do, to at least tell someone about the litter and the dead deer. So I made a compromise with myself and decided to just tell the ranger we'd seen a bear and her cubs by one of the campgrounds, and it looked like they'd gotten into some food. He said he'd warn people to stay alert. Mike and I didn't go back into the park at all the final day of our weekend. In fact, we waited a few years before going back to the Olympic, and luckily we haven't seen any sign of that thing again. It still gives me the creeps,